In progress.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
I am coming to you from the Shasathon here in Pennsylvania somewhere. So we're taking a half-hour break to give this year in Los Angeles. I hope everyone is doing well.
Baruch Hashem. Thank you.
Should I start? Are we ready, Rabbi Muskin?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I hope it comes through clearly on a cell phone the way it does on a computer. But let's get started. Okay, we're continuing our series on great Rebbeim and great Talmidim, and today we're going to talk about probably the most legendary relationship between a Rebbe and a Talmud that exists, and that is the relationship between Reb Chaim Soloveitchik and Rav Baruch Ber. The way they say it, I think even in the introduction to the series, we mentioned this particular relationship because the legend goes that while the Brisker Rav, Reb Chaim's son, was a Talmud of Reb Chaim, and Rav Baruch Ber was a Talmud of Reb Chaim, the difference is that if Reb Chaim would say that a table is like a cow, the Brisker Rav would say, oh yeah, a table has 4 legs and a cow has 4 legs. But Rav Baruch Ber would try to milk the table. That was the difference between Rav Baruch Ber and in his level of absolute bittul to Reb Chaim, that whatever Reb Chaim said, and Rav Baruch, it was a very, very important relationship in Rav Baruch Ber's life. In fact, they say that Rav Baruch Ber, who was known, was a big Bal Menagin. He was very musically skilled. He would come up with all sorts of compositions, of original compositions. Reb Chaim apparently was tone deaf. It's a Soloveitchik family trait that he was not at all musically inclined. So they once asked Reb Baruch Ber, how could it be that you sing and that you make music? The Rebbe didn't do that. You don't do like Reb Chaim. So Reb Baruch Ber said, there's no such thing as a person. HaKadosh Baruch Hu never creates a person that's 100% good or that's 100% not good. There's no such thing as such a person. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Reb Chaim 99.9% good, and the only thing he didn't give him is musical talent. HaKadosh Baruch Hu made me 99.9% bad, and the only thing he gave me is musical talent. That's to that degree is how Reb Baruch Ber felt about himself in comparison to his Rebbe, Reb Chaim. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm actually not going to say much Torah today. It's going to be more about this idea of a Rebbe Talmud relationship. It's something that's very meaningful, and particularly how it plays out in Rav Baruch Ber and Reb Chaim. So a little bit about Reb Chaim, and then a little bit more about Rav Baruch Ber. Reb Chaim was born in Volozhin in 1853. He, of course, was the son of Rav Yosef Tov Halevi Soloveitchik of the Beis Halevi, and the Beis Halevi was passed over for the position of Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin in favor of the Netziv, and the family moved away at that point, but Reb Chaim ultimately came back to be a Rebbe as well. He was brought back, he married a granddaughter of the Netziv, and he was brought back to the yeshiva. He is considered to be, and rightfully so, the founder of the Brisker method, of the idea of analyzing the Gemara and analyzing the Rishonim through very clear categorization, and where all of the halachos are not just a jumble of halachos, but that everything fits into a category, everything fits into a definition and a terminology that makes sense. And his primary work that he wrote is Chidushei Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi on the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, and Reb Chaim worked on that his entire life. He wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. Every word is measured in the Chidushei Rabbeinu Chaim Halevi. He also has what they call the Chidushei Hagrach Halashas, what they call the Reb Chaim in the stencils. It's not stencils anymore. It's a regular printed book, but it's written up by Talmidim of Reb Chaim's Chidushim. Reb Chaim was a very staunch anti-Zionist. A lot of times people think the name Soloveitchik in America, and they think of our Rav Soloveitchik, so they think of Mizrahi, etc. But the rest of the Soloveitchik family certainly did not subscribe to that view. He married the daughter of Rav Shapiro, as I mentioned before, who was also the granddaughter of the Netziv. He had two sons, two very famous sons. He had more than two sons, but two very famous sons, the Brisker Rav Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, and Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, who ultimately became Rosh Shiva in YU. He had many Talmidim, but the major Talmidim that Reb Chaim had were Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Rav Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, Rav Baruch Ber, who we're going to talk about today, Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, Rav Elchanan Wasserman, who we spoke about last time, Rav Shlomo Palachik, who was also Rav Shlomo Palachik, who was the Meitziter Eloi. Maybe we'll talk about him in a few moments as well, who was also a Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva University, Reb Chaim Ozer, Reb Shimon Shkap. I mean, Reb Chaim's tree is a very broad tree, and his mahalech in learning very often is misunderstood. People assume that it's all about analysis and only about analysis. There is a tremendous amount of bekius involved, of a broad range of knowledge involved in Reb Chaim's learning. He reviewed, they say, an entire Masechta Bal Peh every single day. That every single day he would close his eyes and review an entire Masechta of Shas Bal Peh. He felt that a person is not authorized to say Chiddush in learning unless he has learned he knows all of Shas with Perush Rashi. And only then, when he has all of Shas on his mind, is he able to say Chiddush in learning. He was known to have a distaste for the Telzer method in learning. They say that one of the Telzer Rosh Yeshiva was telling him once, Reb Chaim Telzer was telling him once, that he thinks that the way Kiddushin works, that when a man is Makadesh and Isha and they get married, that it's at every moment the Kiddushin is renewed. Every minute there's a new Kiddushin. So the way the story goes is Reb Chaim thought that was so ridiculous. He turned to him and he said, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov, as if like each moment you're having a new Kiddushin. That's clearly not the way it works. He had a strong distaste for that entire way of thinking, that entire style of learning. However, Reb Chaim was a very, very great tzaddik. He was a Baal Chesed par excellence. I think I've mentioned in some other shir that it says, and Rav Soloveitchik said this, that it says on Reb Chaim's tombstone that he was a Rav Chesed and nothing else, just that he was a Baal Chesed. However, people have sent me pictures of Reb Chaim's tombstone. It actually does say more than that. It does not just say that he was a Rav Chesed, but certainly Rav Soloveitchik was under the impression that on his grandfather's tombstone it said that he was a Rav Chesed, and that it didn't really say didn't really say anything else. They say that Reb Chaim's house was a Rishus HaRabin. It was open to anybody and everybody. Everybody could come into Reb Chaim's house. Poor Aniyim were there all the time. They just moved in for months at a time, years at a time, weeks at a time, however long they wanted to stay. So the joke they used to say is that they asked Reb Chaim why he has a door on his house. What does he need a door for if everyone's just going to come in and the door's always open, everyone come whenever they want? And he said because there's a Shitas HaRambam that a house is only chayiv in mezuzah, that a room is only chayiv in mezuzah, a doorway is only chayiv in mezuzah if it has a door. So he says he wants to be Yotzei Shitas HaRambam in Ilchos mezuzah, and that's why he puts a door on his house. But otherwise, Eino Chinami, there's no need for a door in the house of Reb Chaim. They say whenever there was a public announcement that needed to be made in Brisk, they would just hang the announcement in Reb Chaim's house. Like we have like a bulletin board in shul or something where people would put something public because that's the most public place. Nowadays, it's WhatsApp groups and everything else, so I don't think shuls even bother with bulletin boards anymore, but because things that word gets spread other ways. But they said that the bulletin board was not in the shul in Brisk, it was in Reb Chaim's house because there were more people that were going to walk through Reb Chaim's house than anywhere else. That was the best way to advertise. Reb Baruch Ber tried to mimic, to the best of his ability, every single detail of Reb Chaim's persona and Reb Chaim in learning. If you go through the Birchas Shmuel, which is Reb Baruch Ber's sefer, which is a little confusing, he called the sefer Birchas Shmuel named after his father. His father's name was Shmuel. It's a little less known that Reb Baruch Ber was very mekusher to his father also. His father was a Rav, and he was very much connected to his father as well. But that's why he called the sefer Birchas Shmuel named after his father. In fact, when Reb Baruch Ber died, Reb Baruch Ber insisted one of his last dying wishes was that he be buried next to his father. Even though as he was dying, they said the Talmidim were around his bed, and Reb Baruch Ber was saying, the Rebbe is coming, the Rebbe is coming. I need to wash my hands. I see the Rebbe coming. With the impression that you get is that as he was dying, he saw Reb Chaim coming to greet him into Gan Eden, that he saw that was the person that was coming to greet him into Gan Eden. And he told one of the Talmidim, say over the shir now, say over the Rebbe's shir, because Reb Baruch Ber had said over Torah from Reb Chaim, and he wanted the Talmidim to repeat the entire shir that they heard from Reb Chaim. And the Talmidim said, now we're going to say over the shir. He said, say over the shir, the Rebbe's coming. And he said over the shir, and then Reb Baruch Ber closed his eyes, and Reb Baruch Ber went to the Olam Emes. But Reb Baruch Ber insisted on being buried next to his father. He was very, very much connected to his father. Problem was, in the cemetery where his father was buried, there were no spots, there was no open space to bury Reb Baruch Ber. So I think they asked Reb Chaim Ozer at the time, what should we do? Where should we bury Reb Baruch Ber? He insisted being buried next to his father, but there are no spots in the cemetery. It's already full. So they were told the psak that they got is to find a spot. That you need to find a place. If everyone could just mute themselves. You need
do my Sunday stuff.
If everyone could just mute themselves.
Still doing buyout stuff?
Okay, maybe someone could text the person who's not.
We've been in the real estate business for, we switched. We do stuff like that, but we've been in the industrial real estate business now for about 12 years.
Where are you buying
if you're
stuff?
Not muted, if I could just ask if everyone could just mute themselves. Rabbi Muskin, do you have the ability to mute people?
In the Midwest.
I'm looking, I'm learning how to do this.
Illinois.
Yeah, I'm selling. That's what I've been doing for 2 years, but now I'm doing more retail, single tenant net.
Unmute.
All right. Okay, great. So they I forgot. So they buried Reb Baruch Ber in the cemetery, but they buried him perpendicular to all the other graves. So all the other graves went in one direction. His grave went in the other direction because they had to rip up part of the road where they buried Reb Baruch Ber. It happens to be that the Nazis then came. Reb Baruch Ber died in 1939. The Nazis came, and no one else was ever buried in that cemetery. They broke down all the matzevos in the cemetery. Reb Baruch Ber never even had a matzeva. It never even got to that point. And they poured concrete all over the cemetery. There was no way to find anything. It was only recently, like 10 years ago or so, there was a whole Maisa. I don't want to get into the Maisa now. There was a whole Maisa with a little girl who made fun of Reb Baruch Ber, and her family thought that she needed a kapara for something. So they went to find the kever of Reb Baruch Ber, and there was no matzeva. How you can find the kever? There's 70,000 people buried in that cemetery, and there's no matzeva for Reb Baruch Ber, and there's no matzeva for most of the people in the cemetery. So how are you going to find where he was buried? So they worked. They had some clues about that from older people who remember the funeral. They remember that he was right near the Tahara room of the Chaver Kadisha, and they looked around that area, and it was right near a path. And they dug and they dug and they dug, and they found one grave that was perpendicular to the other graves, that was not parallel with the other graves. And they realized they had found the grave of Reb Baruch Ber. So 75 years after his Petira, Reb Baruch Ber had a matzeva. But prior to that, he didn't even have a matzeva. But he was very makusher to his father as well. But that's not the focus today. The focus today is on his connection to Reb Chaim. Reb Baruch Ber came to America in 1928 to raise money. He came together with his son-in-law, Rav Reuven Grozovsky, who was also a tremendous Talmid Chacham and Rosh Yeshiva. And in fact, the New York City mayor at the time, Jimmy Walker, presented Reb Baruch Ber with a key to the city. And he said that Reb Baruch Ber, the mayor of New York City, said that Reb Baruch Ber disproves Darwin's theory of evolution, because only God could have created such a person. He was someone who was so impressive looking. And while he was in the U.S., he visited many cities. He went to Philadelphia and to Pittsburgh, to Detroit, to Boston, to smaller Jewish places. He gave a shir at the National Convention of the Agudas HaRabbanim in Belmar, New Jersey. He gave a shir in Yeshiva University. In fact, he had a tremendous impact on Yeshiva University because for two reasons. First of all, while he was in New York, York, the maitre d'Eloy, Rav Shlomo Palechik, passed away. Now, who was Rav Shlomo Palechik? Rav Shlomo Palechik was when he came to Volozhin, was a 12-year-old boy. It was unusual for a 12-year-old boy to come to Volozhin. They said that when they saw him come, I think Reb Chaim or the Nitziv, someone said, "Where's his crib? Did he come with his crib also?" And then the Reb Chaim tested him, and he said the story goes that Reb Chaim said that he never met such a Meshuna Dike Eloi in his entire life, that he's never seen such a genius like Rav Shlomo Palechik. And Rav Shlomo Palechik was a Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, but sadly he died very suddenly at the age of 51. And Reb Baruch Ber happened to have been in New York at the time. So Baruch Ber said a hesped for Shlomo Palechik because he remembered him as a child. They were friends when back in yeshiva days. So he said a hesped for Shlomo Palechik. Anyone who lives in New York can go visit Rav Shlomo Palechik's kever. It's in Queens. There are a number of Gedolei Torah that are buried there. I ran a tour of the cemetery earlier this year. There's so many Gedolei Torah that are there, all the Torah V'das Rosh Yeshiva. So anyway, so that's one way that Rav Baruch Ber had a tremendous impact on Yeshiva University. The other way that he had a tremendous impact on Yeshiva University, I saw somewhere, I think maybe from Davi Safir, I forgot where I saw, that Rav Baruch Ber was approached by Dr. Revel at the time and asked if he wouldn't mind to take over for Shlomo Palechik as Rosh Yeshiva and Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan. Rav Baruch Ber had no interest in doing so. He did not want to become the Rosh Yeshiva and Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan. But he said, I know someone who's a perfect fit. His name is Moshe Soloveitchik, the son of my great Rebbe, Reb Chaim. And sure enough, they followed his advice and they brought Reb Moshe Soloveitchik over to New York, and Reb Moshe Soloveitchik became Rosh Yeshiva, and that obviously set the path of Yeshiva University Ala Yom Hazeh, where Reb Moshe Soloveitchik's son, the Rav Yosef Tov Soloveitchik, the Rav, took over for him and is the Rebbe of all of our Rebbeim, of all of the Rebbeim, and the Rebbe of your Rabbi, and the Rebbe of all of our Rebbeim in Yeshiva. So that made a tremendous impact. A little known fact that Rav Baruch Ber had such a tremendous impact on Yeshiva University. But his children and his grandchildren all became Rosh Yeshiva. His daughter married Rav Reuben Bezovsky, who was Rosh Yeshiva of Torah V'das in Brooklyn, and Beis Medrash Elyon in Monsey. His grandson Chaim Shlomo Leibovich was, by the way, no relation between Rav Baruch Ber and me. I'm also, my last name is Lebowitz, but not really. Somewhere along the way we changed our last name, and we chose Lebowitz as the I don't know why, but it was like a mother's name or something somewhere along the line. It was a maiden name, but no relation, sadly. But Rav Chaim Shlomo Lebowitz was one of the most prominent poskim and Talmidei Chacham, not poskim, but Talmidei Chacham in Yerushalayim, and was also a major personality in the Panovich Yeshiva in Bnei Brak. Rav Chaim Zimmerman, the famous genius from Chicago, was a nephew of Rav Baruch Ber. Rav Baruch Ber wrote the Birchas Shmuel. That was his magnum opus. If you flip through the Birchas Shmuel, I mentioned before, every single piece kimat in Birchas Shmuel is either based on a Reb Chaim or it's based on Rabbi Akiva Eiger. He had a tremendous affinity for Rabbi Akiva Eiger. But there's one thing in the Birchas Shmuel that you might notice that I never noticed before. As I was looking over Shabbos, I was flipping through Birchas Shmuel, I found that in the beginning of the second volume of Birchas Shmuel, his son-in-law, Rav Reuven Bezovsky, wrote a 5-page bio of the Shver. He wrote a 5-page bio of Rav Baruch Ber, and it is fascinating. He describes his father-in-law's love of Torah. He describes his father-in-law's tzidkus. There were many times in his life where Rav Baruch Ber gave away the last of his food to a poor Jew. All he was concerned about was other people's welfare. He used to say, when I would come before the Beis Din Shalmaila, they're going to look to see, what did I bring with me? Do I have Torah? He said, I don't know if I really have Torah. Do I have Yira Shemayim? I don't know if my Yira is on a madrega, that it's worthy of the term Yira Shemayim, but there's one thing I'll be able to say with confidence, and that is that I loved every single Jew. And when I saw another Jewish person, all I thought about is how to be mative for him, how to do good for him, and how to help him. Rav Reuven Bezovsky writes in that introduction that in addition to that, he never viewed himself as having achieved in learning, as having become a great Talmid Chacham. He writes, Umei olam lo chashav klal ki yarad ad sofa devarim. He never thought he fully understood any any topic. His entire life, he viewed himself as a small Talmud who just now was beginning Gemara. Reb Baruch Ber never thought that he ever got to the letter Taf in the Aleph base. He always understood on each topic that he just got to the Aleph, whatever level of understanding was just the Aleph, and that was his godless. And Rav Reuven goes on to write, Ubi Yosai Rebbe Yoser Gadol B'Olam. He was the greatest Rebbe in the world, but Lolime the Talmidav Ela Echlios Talmud. He taught his Talmidim how to be a Talmud. And this is why it's so powerful to talk about Baruch Ber in the context of this series about Rebbeim and Talmidim. He is the paradigmatic example of a Talmud. All he wanted to do was be a Talmud to his Rebbe and to teach his own Talmidim how to be Talmidim. And Rav Reuven explains, what does that mean that he taught them how to be a Talmud? Other Rosh Yeshiva were busy answering questions, or lister terutzim, or slugging up answers that people gave. Rav Baruch Ber was interested in how do you ask a kasha? How do you give a teretz? How does one raise a suffix? It reminds me very much of how when you talk to Rav Schachter about Rav Soloveitchik, maybe we'll do one month, we'll do that as the Rebbe Talmud relationship. I was just with Rav Schachter this week. Someone had reached out to me and said, the Talmidim of Rav Schachter should really get together and write down all of the stories that Rav Schachter says, about tzaddikim and gedolim from previous generations. A fellow who reached out to me is a very prominent historian. He said, I'll clean up the historical aspects of it, make sure that, for historical accuracy. He said it will be the most popular book in the whole yeshiva world. You should totally do that. So I mentioned the idea to Rav Schachter, and Rav Schachter said, yeah, I tell a lot of stories. And then he paused for a moment and he said, because Rav Soloveitchik used to tell a lot of stories, meaning I would think you tell a lot of stories because they're entertaining, they're interesting, it draws people back into the learning if someone is spacing out. No, that may be true, but I tell a lot of stories because Rav Soloveitchik tells a lot of stories. That's the only reason to tell a lot of stories. Anyway, some of the stories of Rav Baruch Ber was, we mentioned already, the finding of his grave. We didn't go into great detail about how they found his grave. The story goes, and this it's a difficult to believe story, and I don't know where it comes from, but the story goes that someone had there was in a Beis Yaakov somewhere in the western part of the United States, there was a girl that had a Rebbe card with Reb Baruch Ber's picture on it, and Reb Baruch Ber had a very unique look. If you've ever seen his picture, you could see the Kedusha, but also a very, very unique look. And the girl made a disparaging comment. She said, oh, this rabbi looks like a monkey or something like that. And shortly thereafter, she had some sort of Bell's palsy or something on her face where her face was deformed, was unable to move. And the doctor said, look, it could stay like that forever. We have no idea how to fix it. And the family got the impression that she was being punished because of the disparaging remark that she made about Rav Baruch Ber. So the story goes, again, making a very long story very short, the story goes that that family really spearheaded the campaign to find Rav Baruch Ber's kever. First, they went to the cemetery to ask for mechila with a minyan for the slight, and after that, she was cured. But that brought about the finding of the actual kever itself, where they were able to finally give Rav Baruch Ber the matzeva that he deserves. Now, as far as his connection to Reb Chaim, as I mentioned, every piece in Birchas Shmuel is connected to Reb Chaim. But why is it that he appreciated Reb Chaim's Torah more than anybody else appreciated Reb Chaim's Torah? Meaning everybody appreciated Reb Chaim's Torah. Not everybody. There were some people that were jealous, but most people, Reb Chaim revolutionized Torah learning. Why is it that Reb Baruch Ber was able to appreciate it on a higher level somehow, or on a greater level, the more intensity than others? Rav Reuven Grozovsky explains, and I think it's such a beautiful formulation. He says, Gadluso shel Mori Chamizal lo hoisa b'mashen nasan ba'ad haTorah yoser mishar b'nei adam. The greatness of my father-in-law was not that he gave more for the Torah than other people. El b'mashen lokach min haTorah yoser mikol. It's that he was able to draw out from the Torah more than other people did. Well, what does he mean by that? I think what he means by that is that you have a lot of people that will put all of their kochos, all of their energy with great hasmada. They will learn with great diligence in Torah, but that is only one half of the equation. Then when you understand Torah and you achieve in Torah, what is your attitude toward the Torah that you just learned? Is it, okay, another bit of knowledge, let's move on and work hard on the next bit of knowledge? Or are you overjoyed by the Torah that you have just received? Reb Baruch Ber they said you could tell how his learning went by his mood. If he was in a good mood, it means that he had a chiddush that day that made sense to him. It means that he had something that went well in his learning. If he was in a bad mood, it means he was struggling in learning. Nothing else that happened in his life would upset him or bring him joy. The only thing that affected his mood, he had this incredible connection to Torah and to the joy of Torah. Rav Reuven Gazovsky writes that at one point, Reb Baruch Ber was learning with his son, and he told the son a chiddush of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. As I mentioned before, he was very connected to the chiddushim of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. And the son said, yeah, but he heard the chiddush and right away asked the kasha on the chiddush. He said, well, but, so Reb Baruch Ber said, wait. Before you ask any kashas, you need to take a moment and appreciate the beauty of the chiddush of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. You first have to appreciate the depth and the beautiful svara before you ask any questions. And that is how Reb Baruch Ber took more out of the Torah. That when he achieved something in Torah, it meant something to him, and it was something that he had to spend time to focus on. I don't know how well this line will resonate with everybody, but Reuven Gazovsky writes that at one time he said a chiddush in Torah, and he said that he was so excited by the chiddush. He said that he quoted in the name of the Ridvaz about a particular svara. Shekol hachevle ledo shel imo ve'em imo v'kol imaos shahayu lo hayu kedoim b'shvil asvara achas ha'ishachidesh. That all of the labor pains that his mother had and his grandmother had and all the women in history that he descended from had were all worth it because he was able to be born to say that one chiddush. That's how much he valued that a single chiddush. Again, it's on their cheshbon, but whatever. That's how much he valued that chiddush. That he was he took so much more out of the Torah. In that piece, Rav Reuven Gazovsky writes that Reb Baruch Ber believed that the concept of Yeridas Hadoros is not a uniquely Jewish phenomenon. We often think that Yeridas Hadoros is because we're further away from Har Sinai, so we are not as great as our Rebbeim and their Rebbeim and our fathers and grandfathers, etc. He said, no, Yeridas Hadoros is true by the Chachmei Umos Ha'olam as well. You see that humanity in general is not as refined as it was, is not as wise as it was. It's true of the Chachmei Umos Ha'olam as well. He said, the difference? Difference is that when it comes to the Umos Ha'olam, they don't realize that there's a Yeridas Hadoros. With Chachmei Yisrael, we appreciate that there's Yeridas Hadoros, and he said, and the difference is, the reason we're able to appreciate Yeridas Hadoros, where the Chachmei Umos Ha'olam are not able to appreciate it, is because we have a relationship with the Rebbe. So if a person has a relationship with the Rebbe, if I could sit by the feet of Rav Shechter, if Baruch Ber could sit by the feet of Reb Chaim, we can see that we're so far away. We're miles and miles and miles away from where our Rebbe is in terms of their stature, in terms of their chachma. So since we see the Rebbe from close up, we appreciate the concept of Yeridas Hadoros. But if a person doesn't have a connection to a Masorah, a person doesn't have a connection to the Rebbe and to who the Rebbe is, then he's never going to appreciate that sense of Yeridas Hadoros. And it's like when you see something from a distance, it appears to be small. So he said, by the Umos Ha'olam, it's always from a distance. It's always something that appears to be small. In the Kiyum L'Demus Diyukno Shel Admar Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh B'Vacha that Rav Reuven Gazovsky writes, he writes, Hu Haya Omer Ki Einenu Meivin Eich Yochal Adam Lichios Ba'olam Afilu Shah Achas B'li Rav. That Reb Baruch Ber couldn't understand how a person could live even for a Shah Achas, for one moment, without a Rebbe. And he thought the greatest bracha one could have in their life is when they have a Rebbe who is a Gon. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that if you actually open up a Birchas Shmuel and start learning through some of the pieces, it doesn't really sound like Reb Chaim at all. Reb Chaim's Torah sounds entirely different, has a different tone, it has somewhat of a different style, and you would think that, wait a second, for the person who's supposed to be the torchbearer, the one who's carrying forward Reb Chaim's Torah, how come it doesn't resonate as Reb Chaim's Torah? You'll find similar with Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon is a Talmud of Reb Chaim also, and they're very, very different. And that is part of the beauty of Torah, that at the end of the day, different Rabbanim have different personalities, different ways of thinking about things, and as much as we are kafuf to the Rebbeim, every Talmud has, it has to go through his own neshama, it has to go through his own brain, his own way of thinking about things, and it therefore comes out a little bit differently, with his own unique spin, with his own unique way of expressing himself. So even Reb Baruch Ber, if even Reb Baruch Ber could say chidushim that sound different than Reb Chaim, that just tells you how HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he creates each and every human being, there are no two, as Chazal tell us, that there are no two that are the same. Chazal tells us the greatness of the Ribono Shel Olam is that normally when a person makes a coin, so they have an imprint and they make all the coins look exactly the same. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts us all b'tzelem Elokim, and each one of us are entirely different from the other. And even Reb Baruch Ber and Reb Chaim were different from each other, but that is still, to this day, the model, the paradigm of what it means to be a Rebbe, what it means to have a Rebbe-Talmud relationship, Reb Chaim and Reb Baruch Ber. So with that, I wish everyone a wonderful day. And I got to get back to the Shasathon over here. And the Bez Hashem, I'll see everybody next month. I'm not sure yet who we're going to do next month, but we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
My pleasure.
Okay, Kol Tuv.
Take care.